Hi, I'm Maria Theoharis or Velosos on social media. Thanks for watching or listening to Sober 50 on Organised Style podcast. Today, Mary Morton talks about how her son's discussion about climate change gave her the fuel to eventually create Edinburgh Street Stitchers. I hope Mary comes back on the podcast soon. Grab a cuppa and relax with us. It was Judith Staley who asked me to interview you.
Yeah, she was one of the first people who came along to my first street stitching event. So yeah, she's turned into a good friend since then.
Yeah, she's a lovely person.
Yeah, she is.
Mary, thank you for coming on to the podcast for So Over 50 on So Organised Style podcast. For people who don't know you, I'm in Sydney, Australia, and you're in Scotland.
Edinburgh, in
Edinburgh.
Scotland, yeah.
So thank you for coming onto the podcast. When I was doing some research about you, there are a lot of accounts that we can find you. So can you
Yeah,
talk us through how we can find you and more importantly, Edinburgh Stitchers?
right. I suppose the most sensible one is on Instagram. There's an account which is called Edinburgh Street Stitchers. So any information about what's happening with the street stitching will be on there. And the other account, the personal account that I have with Instagram is MVM13.
Yes.
And you can find me there too. I also do Facebook. So yeah, those are the places that I can be found online.
That let's talk about you and the street stitching.
If I go right back to
Yeah.
why I got into this in the first place, in 2019, I was having a conversation with my son, and he was telling me about all of the changes that he was making to his life um, because of climate change. And I had said to him, that's a lot. You're making a lot of changes in your life. Surely the situation isn't as bad as all that. And he went, oh, mom, and I thought, I need to learn more about this. I'm obviously have been left behind. So I did 3 online, I think they call them MOOCs or something,
Oh yeah, Moose.
massive open online
Yeah.
courses with Future Learn. They were about, the first one was climate change, the science, then climate change tipping points, and then climate change, what can you do about it? And in the third one, it had said there's 3 basic things that you can do is you can make changes in your own life to reduce your own carbon footprint. You can lobby government and industry to get them to make changes to how they are tackling the climate situation. And you can talk to people about climate and try and make more people aware of the fact that we all need to be doing as much as we can now because of the urgency of the situation. So I thought, right, okay, how can I do that? So I was looking for volunteering opportunities. Now that I was retired, I thought I might as well use my time for doing something. And excuse me, an organisation here in Edinburgh called the Shrub Co-op, which is for sustainability and reuse hub. And they were running various different things. And one of those things was they were running drop-in garment repair sessions. So I started going along to those as an extra helper, and found that was a way that I could, sensibly get involved. Because one of the things that I hadn't realised until I got involved with Shrub was that the textiles have a huge carbon footprint. For example, here in Scotland, there was a recent report looking at household waste, which said that 6% of household waste in Scotland by weight is textiles, but that 6% accounts for 30% of the carbon. So if we can all wear our clothes for a bit longer and not buy so many, then that makes a really big impact. It's one of the big things that each of us as an individual can do.
It's a big concept for people to understand that what you've got actually is more than just that item. It's what
What went
happened
into
to
it?
create that item. Yeah.
Yeah, Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I also started doing some, reading and learning around the textile industry, and was really horrified by the abuses, and the human rights issues that are built into every piece of textile that comes to us. So I had at that point had decided that that's it. It's going to be secondhand clothing from now on. I have bought a couple of pieces of fabric, but not very many, and I'm really cutting back, and when I'm going into charity shops these days, I'm not necessarily looking at the garment. I'm actually much more interested in the textile and what can I do with that. So
Yeah. I think the good thing about living in the UK is that you do have a lot of charity shop opportunities to do that sort of shopping.
yeah,
The shirt that I'm wearing is actually fabric from a reseller where they resell other people's stashes of fabric. It's not much of a change, but it's something. Yeah.
I mean, I do think we are very lucky here because there's a big network of charity shops in the UK. But having said that, because Shrub also has a kind of charity shop section to what they do, because they're a zero waste charity, so they do food sharing and various other things as well, and bicycle repair and whatnot. But I've had the opportunity of kind of being behind the scenes at the charity shop in terms of when stuff comes in, how they tackle that, and an awful lot of it is not fit to be resold. I think, I don't know whether it's a global figure or a UK figure, but only about 15% of items that are donated are actually resold. That an awful lot of the rest of it goes, to rags for recycling.
I was looking at Wendy Ward. She's been doing research in that area, and apparently there are places where you could donate fabric or clothing that you weren't going to use for scraps, and now they've said stop because they've got too much, and
Yeah,
they've got the waste issue to deal with now.
as well as the when charity items are donated to charity shops, as well as going to waste textiles just to be shredded and used for carpet underlay and things. They also send great bundles of garments to the third world, and it just moves our problem to somewhere that's less able to deal with it. There's no such thing as a way, is kind of how I've started thinking about clothing. You can throw it away, but it's never actually away, particularly if it's made from fossil fuel fiber, that plastic basically. Then it's going to be in the world in some form for hundreds of years. So yeah, there's no such thing as a way.
And so, what step did you then take after learning all of that?
I'd started regularly volunteering with the Shrub Co-op, with the sewing sessions, and I found that really very interesting. And when people came in with a garment that needed repairing, because I'd been repairing things all my life, I didn't find that too difficult. But if people came in and said, "I cannot sew at all, teach me from the very beginning," I was a bit sort of flummoxed and thought, how on earth will I go about that? But luckily I came across a website which is called repairwhatyouwear.com, and it was set up by Ros Stud and Ellie up in Aberdeen, which is also in Scotland. And one of the things that they had on their website, and in fact on their YouTube channel, is a video which is for people who can sew and want to pass on garment repair skills. And it's a very sort of short, it's just an hour and a half, a kind of program of how you can pass on the basic skills of threading a needle, securing your thread, backstitching a seam, sewing on a button, and taking up a hem. And that was invaluable. And I had booked myself onto the course and did it on the Wednesday, and then I think on the Friday I had booked myself to run a course for people who couldn't sew, for a half a dozen people. So it was kind of like trial by fire, but it worked really well. I was very impressed. It was an organisation called Sustainable Fashion Scotland, I think. So there was lots of youngsters who hadn't learned to sew. I think I was one of the lucky people. I think our generation learned how to sew at school. It was part of our education. Whereas I think these days, there's certainly been a big gap. It might be coming back now, but there's been a big gap where people actually haven't learned any sewing skills. So it's, when you're passing on skills, it's usually an intergenerational thing, which is great, because it's nice to be able to be working closely with young people. I think when you retire, sometimes that takes you straight off into the, entertainments that are all people of the same age, which is limiting.
Yeah, it's limiting. And all of those skills that you have, that you've learned for at least 60 years, then gets put to side. And how do you pass that on? So what you're doing is actually great, because you're passing those skills on to a generation that haven't had the opportunity.
And I think that one of the things about it is it's a great joy to be doing it. It's very rewarding. It's and one of the things that when we're at the sewing session, one of the things that the other sewing volunteers that we often reflect on is you always learn something. It might not be about sewing, but you always learn something. So it's a very interesting thing to do. Yeah. So after that, I was thinking to myself, well, this is all very well, Mary. You're passing on sewing skills, but you're passing them on to the people who are coming along to sewing sessions that are run by a zero waste charity. So they've probably already twigged the climate situation, but is there an opportunity to, get out there and try to raise awareness with people who perhaps have not thought about climate or the future or whatever. And I came across something it was probably on Instagram. A lady called Suzi Warren down in London had started a global street stitching movement. Her website is streetstitching.com. And what she was doing was she was going out onto the streets with camping chairs, her and a few friends, a banner on the back of the chair that said, "Stitch it, don't ditch it." And engaging with passers-by. She was largely doing it outside, fast fashion outlets, on sort of, in the high street or the shopping mall or whatever.
Yeah.
And, making people aware that actually mending things is something that you can do and it's not particularly difficult. And I thought that sounds like a great idea. I'm going to go and join the Edinburgh group of that, and made some inquiries and discovered there wasn't one, and thought, oh, I'm going to have to set one up then. So I sent out some messages on various social media channels to different kind of groups that I thought might be interested, crafty sort of groups and sewing sort of groups, and but also climate kind of groups and climate people, and had organised 2022. April 2022 was when we started. And we had the first one on Castle Street in Edinburgh, which looks directly across at the castle, so it's very picturesque.
Wow. It's
near the main sort of shopping drag, but it's not right in the middle of it. And what we found that about half a dozen people were there, and Judith was one of them. And what we found was engaging with the public. If you're in a busy shopping area, they're all busy, they're on a mission, they're out there to shop, and they're scurrying about, and they didn't necessarily have that much time to stop and chat. And what I had thought that we would do, when I was setting it up, I had thought, right, rather than just a one-off now and again, I'll kind of commit to organising one a month between April and October. which are the months that you could conceivably sit outside quite comfortably in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And so, although I have to say that the one that we did on May of that year, the second one was, it was on Portobello Promenade, which is along the seafront. And as I say, it was May, but it was absolutely freezing. It was really cold. But what we found was with that kind of a venue, people were at their leisure. They were strolling. They had more time to chat, and they were they were approaching us and saying, what are you doing? Why are you sitting out here sewing? So after that, we decided really that parks and places like that were a better idea. So we've done Princess Street Gardens, and here in Edinburgh, there's a large area which is called the Meadows, and which is a big kind of park area. And we've been there quite a lot. There's a very nice little cafe, so we plant ourselves outside that, and it's an intersection of various paths, so there's lots of people passing. So we've been there a few times as well. And instead of doing exactly what Suzi was doing, which is just interacting with the public and talking to them about climate and textiles, we had decided that we wanted to add into that and to try and pass on garment repair skills while we were out there. Yeah. And some of the other people who are part of Edinburgh Street Stitchers are also volunteers in various places that pass on skills, like Judith, for example. She works at the Remakery with their repair sessions. So what we had tried to do was every time we were advertising that we were going out, we advertised that people could bring a garment if they wanted to learn how to repair it, and that we would show them how they could repair their own garment.
Right.
And also the other thing that we do is we signpost people to local places where they can gain repair skills, and also to Rosie's website, the repairwhatyouwear.com site, because it has videos on there of how to start from the very beginning of the core skills with left and right hand videos, which is very valuable. Yeah. And then she has videos of common repairs and how to do them. So it's a really useful resource for us to be able to direct people to, that if you're in a situation where you don't have time to actually show people how to complete their repair, you can just direct them to that website, and that they'll be able to figure it out from there.
And is there a common set of questions that people ask when they do stop and talk to street stitchers?
I would say that the most common thing that happens is if we engage with somebody, quite often my kind of introductory question is, do you sew? And if they say no, they very often follow it up with, but I'd like to. So that was an interesting thing to find out, that quite a lot of people actually do want to gain the skills to be able to do their minor repairs for themselves. Yeah. But I think that each person that comes along is coming along to it with a different mindset.
You were doing mending and repairing in an environment where people understood and had the same mindset, whereas street stitching is interacting with the next group of people who would like to stitch but haven't had that opportunity.
Or haven't even ever thought about it, is the other thing. I think the other thing that people really don't realize is it's quite easy. It's not a complicated thing. One of the other things that we have discovered is that one of the major barriers for people is threading a needle. And if you can spend the time at the very start, because it's very easy when people come along and they can't, they're struggling to thread a needle. It's very easy to say, oh, just give me that, I'll do it for you. But that then doesn't enable them to learn to do it for themselves. And one of the things that Roz has on her website is the easy way to thread a needle. And when I had first come across it, I had, at the website, I had thought, I don't need to watch the one about how to thread a needle. I know how to do that. And then I thought, Mary, if you're passing on skills and you're directing people here, you need to be doing it the same way that they're doing it. So I watched the video of how to thread a needle and thought, my God, that's so much easier than the way that I do it. So I now say to people, if you would like to see the easy way to thread a needle, and direct them to Roz. And that's interesting as well, because quite a lot of the people that we engage with, and they say, oh, yes, I do so. And, you say to them, do you know the easy way to thread a needle? And they're kind of like, oh, I'm not sure that I do. And then you show them and they go, oh, my God. And that's a real good way of getting people hooked in. Because when they realize that there are, little tips and tricks that can make their life so much easier, then they think, this is something that's worth engaging with, and it's worth spending the time to have this chat, because I'm going to learn something that's going to help me. So,
and it's the easy way to do it, and they can achieve that rather than the really complicated one where, and you don't get it through the first time. If it's something, if you can give them something that's an easy skill, then it's more motivating, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think one of the other things that we often say to people is, the more you do it, the better you'll get. And it's just a question of practice. It's, none of these skills are particularly difficult. It's just a question of keeping at it. So
yeah. So your particular sewing journey, so you changed how, once you learnt about climate change through your son, encouraging you to learn about it.
Yeah.
What sort of sewing were you doing prior to that change?
Right. Not actually a great deal. I mean, I learned to sew when I was, just quite young. My grandma she trained as a seamstress, and I was always interested. So, as a teenager, I had been sewing garments, because in those days it was cheaper to make your own than it was to buy them. And also it was an opportunity to express your individuality. You weren't the same as everybody else. That there seemed to be relatively few boutiques around in those days. So when you went to the school dances, there was a very good chance you were going to be wearing the same dress as somebody else, which I really didn't like that.
No.
So started at that point making my own. And I suppose throughout my life, I've always done a bit of dressmaking, not an awful lot, but a bit, and mending, obviously. And I think when I retired, I hadn't specifically, had I done much? I'm not sure that I had done very much more sewing than previously, but it was always something that I enjoyed doing. I enjoy the challenge of figuring out what I want to do, and then figuring out by trial and error how to go about it. And I think one of the great things these days is having the internet, because if you don't know how to do it, you can soon enough find out.
Yes.
So that's quite good. But since discovering my climate journey, I suppose the main thing that has changed for me has been the textiles that I use. As far as possible, I'll use things that already exist. For instance, this dress, which you can see, it was one of my neighbours who does patchwork, and she had excess and lots of little bits. And she knew that I volunteered with Shrub and said, you might find these useful for when you're doing workshops and things. So she gave me a great pile of scraps of lovely patchwork fabrics, and I just wasn't going through it with the sewing sessions. I wasn't making much of a dent in it, and I thought, I'm going to make that into a dress. So by that stage, I had met Jane Milburn, who wrote this book, It's called Slow Clothing. In that book, she has got a self-drafted pattern for a pinafore dress. And I thought, oh, I'm going to give that a go. I did the initial one out of an old sheet. And then I joined the strips. I joined the pieces of patchwork fabric into strips and just laid it all out on top of the pattern pieces that I had made, and then sewed it all together. And then I used the sheet that was the toile for the lining of it. So so that's the kind of stuff that I do now. And because I've got this, which is very jolly, and it gives a message. When you wear it, people, it's an automatic conversation starter, and then you can straight away get into the whole thing about reusing and making the most of all of the bits, and it's not waste until you waste it, and all of that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And the top, which is a cotton jersey, I went along to a course here in Edinburgh that was run by a group called the Remode Collective, and they do quite a lot of stuff around rescuing textiles. And I had wanted to learn how to use an overlocker. So this was a make a garment with an overlocker out of waste textiles. And the pattern for this is called Esme. So yeah.
So you've got the Esme top on.
Yes, that's it. And my Christine pinafore named after my neighbour.
Oh, so. Lovely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you're right, your pinafore, the fabrics are very jolly. So wearing them at this time of year while it's snowy and cold, it's a good outfit.
A good thing, yeah.
Is there any advice that you would give to people who are thinking of creating a street stitching group in their area? Now that you've learnt about it, understood, what the benefit of it is, what advice would you give people who want to create their own street stitching group?
I would absolutely encourage them to do it, because it is great fun, and you meet so many nice people who are, like-minded. It's a really lovely thing to do. On the streetstitching.com website, there's information about how to go about it. And basically all you need is people. And as I say, the way that I went about finding out was just to go onto social media and say, this is what I'm planning to do. This is the date and the time and the location. If you want to join me, get in touch. And then everybody that got in touch, add them to a WhatsApp group. And then the other thing that I did quite early on was make some spare banners, so that people who wanted to come along and see if it might suit them, but they didn't want to commit to making a banner before they did that. And then that way I can lend a banner to people. And quite a few of my spare banners are just basically a shirt with the banner on the wording on the back. And then they can just pop that round the back of the chair, or even wear it. I think one of the things that we haven't particularly done, that I think that we're now starting to realise that we should be doing, or could be doing, is actually getting together socially outside of the street stitching. Because when you're doing the street stitching, sometimes it can be really quite busy with interacting with members of the public, and you don't get an awful lot of time to interact and bond as a team. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that I've done is I've got quite a few people on my list. I think there's about nearly 50 on my WhatsApp list at the moment. And what I do when I'm organising an event is I put the information out there on the WhatsApp group and just say to people, if you can join, then let me know and come along. And that works well. We don't expect everybody to be there every time. That would be crazy. The other thing that I have discovered that's good is that quite often there are other events that are on that you can just piggyback onto. Like, for example, there's a climate festival and a a canal festival and the Meadows Festival, and different things during the summer that are happening anyway. And you can quite easily just pitch up and and do your thing. If so long as space isn't an issue. Mm-hmm. And the Shrub Co-op, the Zero Waste charity, they quite often have stalls at various different events. So we just tack on as part of their team. And they'll say, can you bring some street stitchers to this event? And I'll go, yes, I'm sure I can. And all I need to do is send out a WhatsApp message, and bingo, it happens. Thanks to the fantastic and wonderful people that join me, because without them, I would just be some sad case sitting on a chair on my own in the city centre. So yeah, if it wasn't for the fact that other people have joined me, it wouldn't have worked at all. So I'm very grateful to them for that.
Yeah, it sounds like a very good group. And the idea of meeting outside of having a stitching session is going to be great when you actually do it, to become more cohesive and to share experiences together.
Yeah. And the other thing that I do is I recommend the Roz's video about how to pass on sewing skills, because I think a lot of people who can sew are not necessarily very confident in their abilities of passing on skills. But really, once you get started, it's not difficult. It's not rocket science. And with mending, and in particular with mending, there's kind of like no wrong way of doing it. There's many, many right ways of doing a mend. There's no wrong way. So, yeah.
And I suppose if people want to have a discussion around visible versus invisible mending, well, that's fine. But it's all mending.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the other things that happens, any kind of mending get together, if somebody brings along a garment and you look at it and you're a bit kind of like, oh my God, how on earth will I do this? If there's two or three others, sewers around, and you can all get together, and somebody will go, oh, well, I would do it this way. And somebody else would, well, have you thought about this? What about needle felting? And, so we kind of, have a sort of a discussion around everybody's different ideas, and then usually pull them all together and do something that incorporates bits, from everybody. So yeah, so that's really helpful. And the other thing, of course, with any team, different members of the team have different specialities, if you like. So if somebody comes along to the street stitching and it's a particular kind of a mend, you can say, oh, well, the lady 3 down the line, she's particularly good at this kind of thing. You could go there. The other thing that we've started doing, rather than sitting in a line, we've tended more to kind of sit in a group, a kind of a circle with gaps, so that people can then join in. That it's more inclusive and chatty and conversational. Yeah, if we use that kind of a setting. So we've deviated from the traditional street stitching way of doing things, and finding our own way. Roz from Repair What You Wear, she sometimes runs live classes rather than just the videos. So it's worth keeping an eye open to see if she's doing any classes for training up people who can sew to pass on skills. That because it's always better, I think, learning in an environment where you have the opportunity to ask questions. So, but the video is really excellent to have as a standby, and to be able to direct people to as a learning resource. Yeah. And one of the things that I didn't mention was I had been initially concerned about how complicated it might be to get permission to street stitch. And I think the whole idea is, if you go somewhere that's public property, that's just part of the street, you don't need permission. You just go and do it, as long as you're not being a nuisance and blocking a
Yeah.
thoroughfare or that kind of thing, you can just go and do it. The only one time when we were approached by some sort of authority to say, what are you doing and why are you doing it here? The answer of, we only usually do an hour and a half. So, we had said, explained what we were doing and said, we're only going to be here for another half hour. And they were kind of, that's fine then,
Yeah.
So, there isn't really very much in the way of organisation involved in it, other than deciding when you're going to do it and sending out the information.
And I suppose, if you have a group and you want to be part of or go to a festival, I suppose you would just give them a call and just check.
Yes, just check that it's suitable for them to do that. It's quite interesting now, though, because because we've been doing this for 3 years, when we go to events, people will say, "Oh, you were at the such and such festival." So so even although they maybe don't engage with you, there is an impact from being out there and mending in public that you're not aware of, but you're having an impact, even although people might not be engaging. So it's been an absolute joy to do it. So I'm really pleased that other people are thinking about joining in, because that would be great.
And so listeners and viewers will be able to find more details of what you've discussed on the website, on the links to the video and the audio and everywhere. So I'll do my best to make sure I get as much from Mary so that I can pop them there, and that way people can learn and possibly start their own street stitching group in their local area.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody wants to get in touch directly, if they have a specific question, I'm absolutely happy to deal with that as well. So.
And where would they contact you directly?
Probably through the Instagram account's the best thing, or I do have an email address with Shrub that I could give you if that would be suitable as well.
Okay, all right. Great.
I'll send you that for the list.
Okay, that's wonderful. Right. Mary, thank you for giving us your time, talking us through what it is you're doing with street stitching and why, and also being a resource of people who want to start their own street stitching group. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been very interesting.
It's been a pleasure, Mary. I'm so glad to have met you.
And you too. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This episode of Sew Organised Podcast Force Over 50 was video and audio produced by me, Maria Theoharis, in my sewing room with permission from Mary. Sound by bensound.com. If you'd like to support the production of Sew Organised Podcast, pop over to Patreon. Make sure you direct message Sandy on Sew 50 to support their challenges and guest posts. Go back through the podcast archive to hear and see more people from the Sew 50 community. There are over 450 episodes to listen to on Sew Organised Podcast. I look forward to being with you in your sewing room next time. Stay safe, everyone.